Hello, everybody. Pastor Steve here, and I'm really excited you've joined me for today's devotion. As we are doing on Fridays, we're reading a chapter out of the book of Proverbs. Today, we are in Proverbs 12, and then Monday, we'll be back in the book of Exodus. Proverbs 12 today, so open your Bible there. And let me also ask you to be praying because tonight, Friday, April 4, we have several young families, young couples coming to an event that we call Confident Parenting. And it's going to be a really important time in the life of a lot of these young parents as we have a guest, Jim Burns, talking to them about how to parent in a confident manner, how to do it well. And so we love doing what we can to strengthen families here at First Baptist. So would you be praying for all these young couples that'll be here tonight? All right. This chapter, like, most in Proverbs, really makes you think. There is so much in this chapter that just kind of, gets your attention and causes us to think and reflect. And this chapter in particular, I think, speaks a lot to how we treat people, that if we are righteous, we treat people a certain way. And if we are what he calls wicked or unrighteous, we treat people in a different way. And I want us to look at some of what he says about that, how we treat people in this particular chapter. Chapter 12, starting with verse 5. He says, "The thoughts of the righteous are just, but the counsels, the advice, the speaking, and so on of the wicked are deceitful." When the just, or I think the King James translates it, the thoughts of the righteous are right, or just. It's a very broad word. It has a legal connotation associated with it, the idea of doing what is legally just, what is right, what is fair, what is approved by the courts, or for us as disciples by the Lord, what is right in the sight of God. And it really means that we don't take advantage of others. We don't use our position or whatever, the idea, well, it's just business. I get that. But as a follower of Christ, it's hard to say, well, it's just business to justify doing something that's unfair, something that takes advantage of someone in an unhealthy way. So he's saying that if you're righteous, then your thoughts, and that gets into how you think about situations and persons, how you plan, how you conduct yourself, how you prioritize, how you go about stuff shows up. Our thoughts issue themselves in actions. And so what we're planning and thinking shows itself in what we do. So therefore, he says our thoughts, our planning needs to be what is just, what is fair, what is right. And then that shows itself in our behavior. Whereas the wicked, their counsel, their thinking, their thought process, their decision-making, their advice, their planning is deceitful. They're going to do what they have to win or to get ahead. That deals with how we treat people. Drop down to verse 18, where he says, "There is one who speaks rashly, like the thrust of a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." Now, that's a powerful image. Somebody is angry and they're just swinging away, thrusting with a sword or with a knife. He said, people who just speak rashly, you're angry, you're emotional, and you just say stuff and it just rushes out like a flood, like thrusting a sword. He said, that's not good. The wise person, the righteous person, rather than cutting people all the time with that sword, his tongue brings healing. And so he's speaking here about the power of anger and the power of the tongue, of words. Look at verse 26. He says, "The righteous is a guide to his neighbor, but the way of the wicked leads them astray." The righteous is a guide to his neighbor, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. Righteous people talk to people, give advice and instruction to people. Righteous people set an example for others that is good and positive and healthy and holy, and you guide your neighbor. And your neighbor is not just the person who lives in the house next door. Your neighbor is anybody you encounter in life. When you are righteous and live that way, then you set an example. You guide people toward what is right, what is good. But the way of the wicked leads people astray. People who don't want to live righteously are a bad influence on others. So he's really saying that even how you live, righteously or unrighteously, has an impact on other people. It's a powerful verse. And so he talks a lot in this chapter about how are we treating people, what influence are we having on people, but he also speaks in this chapter through a few verses about how we see ourselves, how we view ourselves and how we view our own life. What is our attitude about self and about life? In verse 1, he said, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid. Drop down to verse 15, very similar. He says, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man is he who listens to counsel. It's the idea of, are you teachable or are you a know-it-all? Do you learn from others? Do you learn when people correct you or confront you? Or do you want everybody to just be a yes man, always agree with you? Are you always right? And it's hard for you to see other people's perspective? Well, our attitude about ourselves, how we see ourselves, then affects how we treat other people. And one last one, verse 9, where he says, better is he who is lightly esteemed and has a servant than he who honors himself and lacks bread. Now, in their culture, wealthy people often had servants. And he said it's better off to be somebody who is lightly esteemed. In other words, you don't make a big show of yourself. I remember reading years ago about Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, showing up at the airport, at a small business airport, local airport, to pick up a business person who had flown in. And he was driving his old, beat-up pickup truck. The person who is lightly esteemed, not front and center all the time, but he's successful. That person, he says, there in verse 9, is better than the one who honors himself, puffs up himself, brags about himself, wants to be the center of attention, puts himself front and center, but lacks bread. He's really not successful. It's a show. It's an act. Pretending to be what he's not. He's saying have some humility. Stop tooting your own horn all the time. So be teachable, learn from others, have some humility, treat people right. Treat people with justice, treat people with fairness. And you'll do well. That's what the righteous does, he says. So I think there's a lot of good stuff in this chapter to help us know how to live as disciples of Jesus. Hey, remember, pray for the Confident Parenting banquet and teaching tonight. Pray for Sunday's worship services. And then I'll join you on Monday with another devotion as we look at Exodus chapter 3. God bless you and have a great weekend, everybody.